Hope. And you can listen to his show on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or his website, which is www.ohio verse, or just theworldpodcast.com. So here is Alex.
Thank you. I didn't mention on there, I'm a graduate of Grandview Heights High School under Mr. Kulik's tutelage here. So he was our superintendent at the time, so I'm glad he's here. So Aaron asked me to speak today, guys. I host a show called Ohio v. the World. So every episode, it's Ohio versus something. So we did one on Jesse Owens. It's called Ohio versus the Nazis. We did one on Prohibition. It's called Ohio versus Booze. So we take a local person, place, event, connect it to Ohio, and then kind of blow it up to a bigger scale. So just look it up. Who here listens to podcasts? Anybody? It's starting to get a little bit bigger. So maybe you can show some of the older members how to find them. My mother. Well, I'm just saying. I have a couple thousand listeners every episode, but my mom has never heard my show ever. And my mom loves history, and she just can't figure it out. So honestly, if you just type in Ohio v. the World into the internet, it'll happen for you. Okay. So there's all the information, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. What we're talking about today is Warren G. Harding, okay? The last Ohio president. There's been many Ohio presidents. And the reason we're talking about him today is he was actually a Rotary member. He's a Rotarian. And he spoke at the National Rotary Conference in 1922 in St. Louis, June 22. The first president to talk to a Rotary Club. He's also an honorary member of the Marion, Ohio Rotary Club, which was established that same year, just about 45 miles north. So he was a Rotarian, and again, that's kind of our Rotary connection for Mr. Harding. What we're talking about today is whether or not he's one of the worst presidents. He's widely regarded as, honestly, on some of the bigger lists, Arthur Schlesinger, he's a great 20th century historian, has Harding in dead last. And he's always seems to be in the bottom 5. So what I'm going to argue today is that he wasn't that terrible. I'd say he's about the 10th worst president, maybe even 12th worst. But there's so many others. Buchanan was an awful president. Andrew Johnson, although he's been, I think, fantastic after the presidency. Jimmy Carter was not a great president. Herbert Hoover also had a rough time with the old Depression. So what I'm going to argue is that he's not that bad. The reasons are, we remember the Roaring 20s. Harding takes office in 1921. Right after the war, a really bad economic time across the country, and especially around the world. So he gets that economic machine going. He's a Republican president who believes in promoting businesses at the time. One thing he doesn't get credit for is he really pushed for increased civil rights. After the war was an incredibly there's a lot of racial strife after the war, okay? Whether it's, I would say 1919 is one of the worst years in American history for African Americans, and the attempts to integrate them following the war were pushed back very badly. The 20s saw a huge rise in the KKK. We talked about that on one of our shows, and especially in Ohio as well, but Harding really does stand up for African Americans and does promote their civil rights. Strong supporter of the female suffrage. He's the first president elected with female voters, and they vote overwhelmingly for him. Of course, they did not really know about his philandering ways. Nobody did until he died. But a very strong supporter of the female vote, which very much voted Republican in that first election, really in all the elections in the 20s. When he died in 1923, he was not thought of as the worst president. He was beloved. People loved Warren G. Harding. And when he died suddenly in office, just 3 years into his term, you have to look back. And I like to look at history as how it was viewed at the time, instead of looking at it from almost 100 years later. So these are some of the reasons I don't think he's the worst. Plus, he's an Ohioan, and I love Ohioans, and he's a Rotarian. So he's born in 1865. I can't believe I found this old picture of him. But he's born in 1865, Caledonia, Ohio. Anyone ever heard of Caledonia? It's something like Morrow County, I think, maybe, or Marion County. Yeah, Marion. So He's outside of Marion. Born right after the war, November '65. He's about 14 years old when they moved to Marion, Ohio. I got this old picture of Marion. Look at that. So Marion is 37,000 people today. Anyone from Marion, been to Marion? It's pretty close. Paul knows a lot about Marion, apparently. Just north of Columbus. It's named after the swamp fox. I only put this in here because I really like the swamp fox. He's a really cool guy. So Francis Marion. 12,000 people in 1900, though. It's a pretty large city. It's on the railroad from Cleveland to Columbus. He goes to a really small school that really he got a lot of flack when he's older. It's a place called the Ohio Central College that he goes to. It doesn't exist anymore. It didn't exist shortly after he went there. But people always said that Harding wasn't an intellectual, and one of the reasons they used it, they basically said his school was kind of it's almost like he went to the University of Phoenix kind of thing and then became the president, you know? It's a school that it just didn't have very strong academic background. Anyways, in his early 20s, he buys the Marion Star, okay? And it's a struggling newspaper, and he borrows $300 from his dad, buys the paper, becomes the editor, and builds his paper up into a real force across the country. And this is kind of his foray into politics. He starts meeting all these people. You know, right after he buys the paper, he goes to the 1884 Republican Convention, meets all these folks, and he becomes kind of doing things like the Rotary. He kind of builds his way up in Ohio through Marion. And he actually marries, there's 2 papers in Marion, which seems crazy today. But you got to remember about newspapers, there's no television, there's no radio. I mean, this is what you had. You had the newspaper, and that was really your only connection to the outside world. It was your internet. It was your Facebook. It was, everybody had a paper. So he actually marries his paper's rival. The other paper, the guy who owned that hated him, but he marries his daughter, Florence Harding. And so his father-in-law pretty much always hated him. It's a pretty good story. Anyways, in 1900, he's 35 at that point, joins the Ohio Senate. He becomes our lieutenant governor, which is basically the vice president of Ohio. And then becomes a U.S. senator in 1950. So he really does kind of rise up. He's still, he actually looks about 40 in that picture. And he makes his way up. Harding in the Senate, okay? He's in the Senate during World War I. And you gotta understand something about Harding. He's just a people pleaser, okay? That's what he is, and that's how he made his, he's the ultimate compromiser right on here. Everyone liked Harding, Republican, Democrats. That doesn't make him a great politician, but it makes him well liked in the Senate. For example, he's a lot of contradictions. Heavy drinker, loved playing cards, votes for prohibition. He votes for prohibition because he doesn't want to lose his seat. He votes for prohibition not for the reasons that the Anti-Saloon League would want him to. He just votes for prohibition because he thinks it's politically expedient. Everything he does seems to be for political expediency. He votes in favor of the war, and then comes back later and votes against the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations. So his votes and his beliefs usually don't line up. But he works his way up there. He's there for 6 years. And he goes to Chicago. He tries to run for president in 1920. This is the image you get when you type in Chicago 1920 into Google. He wins the Republican nomination. He is maybe running 4th or 5th. He has a really similar campaign to John Kasich had in 2016. He wins one primary. It's Ohio. He wins it by 10,000 votes. He goes next door to Indiana, and he finishes in 5th. He gets, like I said, probably 4th or 5th in the primary, but he stays in the race. His wife will not let him get out of the race because he just didn't quit things back in the 1920s. He just saw him through to the end. But they can't find a vote. So on the first vote, the first ballot they take at the convention, he gets like 60 votes. The person first gets like 400. Slowly builds up, builds up, builds up. He's the ultimate what I call smoke-filled room. People still talk about this one night at this Chicago hotel where basically Harding was named the nominee. At about 3 in the morning, some senators, after some drinks and some cigars, decide, let's just switch everyone's votes to Harding. He's an available man, they call him. But basically, he becomes president because about 5 different people decide on the 10th ballot, by the way, they took 10 ballots, he's nominated in June. The 1920 election, We got this nice little poster here. This is his opponent, also an Ohioan, also a newspaper owner. It's pretty weird. These are the last two Ohioans to run for president in a major party. You have James Cox from Dayton. James Cox runs the Dayton Daily News. He's up against Warren Harding, who runs the Marion Star. I mean, Ohio is kind of the peak of Ohio politics, where we have both major parties have Ohioans running, and both oddly have the same job. It's pretty weird. Cox, the Democrat, was also governor of Ohio going into the race. This is Harding throwing out a pitch at a baseball game. He runs a campaign in Marion. Marion, Ohio becomes like the center of the universe that summer, which is pretty crazy. So he decides, you couldn't do this now, he decides to just run his campaign from his front porch. So here he is, and this is what he did every day. He'd have a couple thousand people show up, they'd all take pictures. His campaign has a lot of money. The Republicans throw a lot of money into this race. Kind of a modern campaign. They started calling people, they started busing people in, spending a lot of money on mailers. But everyone's coming to Marion. It's an idea he stole from William McKinley, who also used to do a front porch campaign in Canton about 20 years earlier. Not something you could do today. You could not sit on your front porch in Marion, Ohio, in central Ohio here, and win a presidency. It's pretty insane. But it worked for him. People liked him. And kind of his real, other than economic stability, this is his big thing, was what he called normalcy, which a lot of people gave him a hard time about. It's almost the equivalent of, remember George W. Bush used to say strategery or something, remember that? People question whether normalcy was even a word. And it goes back to that idea of Harding's an idiot, no education, Ohio bumpkin. But what people wanted was normalcy. And I won't read this whole thing to you. But this is a very popular line in almost all of his speeches. The idea is we just got out of World War I, and Harding is it's just going to be normal. It's going to be, we're going to get back to the basics. We're not going to, we're not going to get involved in foreign wars. We're going to focus on America. It's the kind of idea for a campaign that I really think could work 100 years later in 2020. This idea of normalcy really could be it really could be a great idea. We're not the dramatic, but the dispassionate. I don't know what the word equipoise means there in the fourth line, so I should have looked that up. Not submergence in internationality, but sustainment and triumphant nationality. So, if you're looking for a political campaign, an idea in 2020, maybe just go back 100 years and you're going to do the Harding campaign, the return to normalcy, as they call it. It's pretty clear that Harding's going to win. Look at this map, guys. This is what a map looked like in the 1920 election. Now, granted, he kicked Cox's ass here. It's 404 to 127, 37 states to 11, 60% to 34%. But look at, these are the Democratic voters.
Interesting.
It's pretty crazy how this is flipped. And the Republicans, that even in 1920, were the party that almost all African Americans voted for. Again, the female vote, this is the first national vote with a presidential vote with female voters. We vote overwhelmingly Republican. But the Democrats ran the South, and the Democrats were, they had a president before from Virginia, Woodrow Wilson, beloved president, but also a total racist. Harding brings African Americans back into the government after Wilson had basically thrown all of them out when we're talking about federal government. The West, look out here, California has 13 electoral votes back then. It's the same amount as Kentucky. Pretty crazy. I did the math last night. I think Ohio must have been the fourth largest state. So you go New York, PA, Illinois, Ohio. Anyways, he kills. Harding's president. He's inaugurated March 1920. That's Florence Harding, his wife, on the right. This is where Harding screws everything up. He appoints these guys. You have Charles Evans Hughes here, is actually the presidential candidate 4 years earlier for the Republicans, Secretary of State. He's fine. In the background, you can see Herbert Hoover, who's actually a great politician, just a bad president, and he runs commerce. But he appoints a bunch of people from Ohio who have no idea what they're doing. And that's where Harding gets into trouble. That's why there's all this scandal in the Teapot Dome. He hires his brother-in-law to be the head of the federal prisons. He hires his personal lawyer and buddy to be the attorney general. And decisions like that really screw him over. So let's focus on the good here. People loved Harding. He was like an average dude who had somehow become president. It's still shocking to me today that he became president. There he is throwing that baseball. It doesn't look great, but President Obama did not have a very good form throwing a baseball either. Not everybody could throw it like George W. could. 1921, he hosts a big disarmament peace conference. He brings people in. It's a very successful conference, involving the European powers. He formed a budget. He sent the first formal budget to Congress. A novel idea today, an idea that would really be cool if we could pull that off. But he formed a budget office, and like I said, he actually put together his own budget in 1921, sent it to Congress, and it was approved. And it actually paid for itself back then, if you can believe it. He guides us out of that post-war recession. He cuts taxes. He grows the economy. He embraces the automobile. One of the ways he pulls us out of this economic disparity after the war is he starts building roads. He was kind of a visionary when it came to embracing future ideas, not relying on trains as much as the Wilson administration had ignored cars at a time for some time, thought it was just a passing fad. One of my favorite Harding moments, I told you I thought he was kind of an unknown civil rights pioneer here. He goes to Birmingham, Alabama as president, 1 year in, Halloween 1921, and he speaks to 30,000 people in Birmingham and tells them that it's a segregated crowd. So we have 20,000 whites, 10,000 African Americans separated to listen to the speech, and he just gives it to them with both barrels. Whether you like it or not, unless our democracies lie, you must stand for equality. He gives a 45-minute speech on African American equality in Birmingham, Alabama in 1921. Cat calls from the whites in the audience and cheers from the African Americans in the audience. It really was a major shakeup. No one had gone down, the president had not gone down south and told these people the way it should be, basically ever. Not since the war at least, not since Reconstruction in the 1860s and 70s. So I think this is a huge moment. It shows the kind of person that he was. I think it shows that he was a really good leader. But again, change is still slow, okay? Even if President Harding goes down south and tells the Southerners, that it's time for equality, but this is a moment no one ever talks about. It's really a great speech. It's recorded. Parts of it are recorded. I think it was re-recorded after, to be honest. But really impressive moment for Harding. And one of the reasons I think he's actually a pretty decent guy, pretty decent president. He goes out west. He's the first president to go to Alaska. He tours the West for months with his wife. He's in San Francisco in 1923, I believe August 2nd. I wrote that down somewhere. I think it's August 2nd, 1923. 3 years into his presidency, has a heart attack, dies. So very suddenly. A lot of people say it had to do with the stress of the administration. Things are starting to come down. Scandals are starting to come down. He starts to learn about Teapot Dome. The guy who runs his Veterans Affairs is basically selling medical equipment that the government owns out the back door. Contracts, things are bad. He always said, it's not my enemies that keep me up at night, it's my friends, is what Harding used to say. But people are shocked. It's a huge outpouring. They bring him back to D.C. It's actually a pretty cool picture of his motorcade here leaving the White House. He lies in state for a few days. They bring him back to Marion. Beloved president. Again, it's maybe 2 months after he dies, this outpouring of affection that the scandal starts hitting. These guys right here, this is what they called them, the Ohio Gang. You got Harry Doherty, this guy right here, Jess Smith, really, really pretty big dirtball when it came to making deals with prohibition people, with gangsters. He would sell basically government prescriptions, licenses to sell alcohol to gangsters. Ends up killing himself right before Harding dies. So, like I said, Veterans Association, the guy is convicted of a felony, goes to jail after Harding dies. Justice Department, like we talked about, Harry Doherty, Jess Smith, involved in corruption, prohibition. His brother-in-law, the director of prisons, I only put it on there because he just does a really bad job. He has no idea what he's doing. But the problem he did is he made his friends his cabinet members. And that was a huge mistake. And it leads to things like the Teapot Dome scandal that we've heard of, which is basically a selling of government land, federal land, at bargain basement pricing, knowing that there's oil underneath it. And obviously getting those people making those sales, the Department of the Interior, making some money on the side through kickbacks and such. The Director of the Interior would also go to jail over this. All this happens, he dies in August, all this breaks in October. Hearings, all this stuff, this would go on for years. And this is really what marred Harding's, his legacy, and one of the reasons why people consider him the worst president. And I can say that, although he had nothing to do with these types of things, he still put these people in power. And like I said, that heart attack, I think, has a lot to do with seeing all this come, unravel. So, again, is Harding the worst president ever? Absolutely, I do not think he is. I think he's somewhere in that bottom half. But he's our last Ohio president, so I'm going to fight for him as best I can. The show, we are going to do a bunch of stuff about presidents. I interview, every episode I basically interview an author, a historian, somebody who was there, whatever we can do to kind of bring it alive a little bit and make it fun. So we have a beer for every episode, we have a book recommendation for every episode, and trying to bring history back to being somewhat cool, hopefully. But yeah, it's Ohio Be the World, so download it, and all that good stuff. Thank you. That's all I have. And our first president and Rotarian, so there you go. Any questions about Warren Gamaliel Harding? Warren G, as they call him, yeah.
So, I think you can draw any parallels almost 100 years later with what we're facing now.
What I would say is really what I talked about is the world was, this almost starts kind of the American First movement. It's in that 1920s. It's not Harding, it's almost the entire Republican Party. There are some parallels, I think, to the upcoming election. There's so much turmoil from 1916 to 1920 that people just want to not worry about their politicians, what they're doing, putting them in harm's way. Every day there's a new thing going on. The government, there's a huge crackdown in 1919 called the Palmer Raids, who's the Attorney General. There's all kinds of terrorist activity. Somebody blows up Wall Street, kills 30, tons of TNT. They drive it right into Wall Street in 1920 before the election. Kills 20, 30 people, huge explosion. There's a lot of whether it's anarchy, communist movements, people. It's really the reason Harding wins is because he just this return to normalcy. Where things are going to be just like they were in the past. I think it's a different approach in 2020, but this idea of I'm a normal person and you don't have to worry about me with the nuclear football. I think that kind of thing could work in 2020, a kind of Harding approach, a laid-back approach. Anything else? This is our final Central Ohio president. So,
I guess you could say he was known by the friends he kept.
the company you keep. There you go.
That's what you try to teach your kids.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's a good. Be like, look at Harding. He could have been something. You don't want to end up like him.
I think the most disturbing thing is he was a Rotarian in for prohibition.
I think deep down that he was not for it. When it comes to his prohibition vote, Jerry, he voted for it thinking he put a time limit on it. So basically, he voted for prohibition, but it has to be passed within, I think it was 1 year or something. All the states have to ratify. 36 of the 48 states have to ratify within 1 year. So Harding passes it to look like a good guy, the Anti-Saloon League, who, when he was lieutenant governor in 1905, he's with a guy named Myron Herrick is the governor of Ohio. Herrick is widely popular. The state's doing very well, and the Anti-Saloon League decides we don't like Herrick. He's pro-liquor, and in 1905 they vote Harding out of office. So he always kind of feared the Anti-Saloon League in that dry vote. And after 1905, when he lost his job as lieutenant governor, he always kind of kowtowed to him. So he votes for prohibition, but his idea is there's no way 36 states will ratify this thing in 1 year. And then it'll be dead, and they'll have to bring it back up again, and hopefully things will change by then. And unfortunately, it was ratified in like 3 months. All these state legislatures got it together. I think Tennessee is the last one to ratify, and it literally just takes a matter of months when Harding thought it would never pass, and that's why he voted for it. To make himself look good, but he didn't think that we would lose booze, because he loved booze.
you have to understand Jerry's comments. He describes our club as a drinking club with a Rotary Club.
I think I know what Epipose is.
Yes, it's
We
something.
have a polo player, and I think that's what Scott does after he scores a goal. He scores.
I like that. It's better than I've got. I have no idea what it means. They didn't teach that back in Grandview. Paul didn't put it on the curriculum.
It means equilibrium.
Equilibrium, see?
Yeah.
Back to the
Balance of forces or interests.
we'll say it again, Terry.
Balance of forces or interests.
Balance of forces or interests. So there you go. Again, middle of the road. Just everything's going to be normal and fine.
I've got a bit of trivia.
Oh wow.
So, for for you guys, you already know. You alluded to the reading song, like the reading, not the song.
Oh, the book
There's
recommendation,
The
yes.
book recommendation has a theme song.
I wrote a children's song for the show that's called I Like Reading, and we play it before every book recommendation.
And it's performed by a former Music in the Round artist, John Elliott.
That's right. He wants to do a remix of it. It's only 30 seconds long, but people love that song, I Like Reading.
Will you sing it for us?
I can just tell you the words. What is it? From Garfield's Tomb to the Serpent Mound or something. So the verses are all like Ohio history things, and the chorus is just I like reading. That's all.
It's quite catchy.
It's not catchy like good catchy. It's like annoying you all day catchy. So
I wasn't going to sing it.
anything else, guys? This was fun. So have me back next year. We'll find another Rotary connection.
I have just a quick question.
Yeah.
Are the junior high and high, I think junior high is when you do Ohio history, are you a part of a lot of
I
educational-
am not right now, but what I am, I started a nonprofit with this podcast. So we raise money kind of like any normal charity, and we're going to give that money starting in May to, we're doing a high school senior, so we're going to give away two $1,500 checks. We're doing a audio or video essay, so it's an essay that's not written, kind of like a show. So it has to be about Ohio history. So I'm working right now with Grandview and Arlington. I'd like to, just because I know the history teachers there, I'd like to branch it out to maybe not the most privileged children in Franklin County. But it's my high school, and I do love Grandview Heights. So we're starting there this year just because I want to kind of see how it goes. So I've got a little board of people that do that. I'll tell you who I work with a lot is the Ohio History Connection. They've been really helpful, whether it's getting guests or, so we're collaborating a lot more. We'll see. We just started our second season, so the show just started in March, and we do seasons basically every other Monday we release a new show. So this will go till April, then I take a few months off, and then I come back, and we have a big party every time. We had Jesse, thank you for hooking that up. Jesse Henry played at our last launch party. So that's kind of our educational connection.
Yeah, don't forget us next party.
Yeah, I'll definitely put you guys on there. It was really, really fun. So I'd like to be more involved in Ohio. I remember it was Clark Heron. You remember Clark at all? And he did a great job. You have to learn all the 88 counties and all that stuff. I think it'd probably be better. I'm a little more geared to like maybe a community college setting or something, But I'd love to come and talk to Ohio. So anybody has an Ohio history speaking opportunity, I'd like to do that. But it's fun. They wrote a really nice article about us in the Columbus Live 2 weeks ago. That was really, so look that up. And the girl who wrote it just did an amazing job. She really did her research. And hopefully more and more people listen. Because it's not just about Ohio. Like I said, we take an issue and kind of blow it up to, and we try and give you at least some kind of, like you asked about, how does this affect today or moving forward? Because that's really what history is. It can be a great guidepost about how to move forward. Okay. Anybody else? Thank you for getting that computer working.